And we're back for week whatever. I'm not even sure if we're going to be counting this as a week 14 or 15, whatever it is, because there's a new chapter.
We will be counting that as week. I think it may be 15
Yeah.
as week 15. Yeah. So in the new chapter, we came up with an idea for kind of a new format, a 20 to 25-minute videos that are aimed at answering a question that we pose before the video. The second part of this format is to consume the content on a given subject that will get us closer to answering the questions throughout the week, instead of mindless content consumption. So we'll aim at uh, at doing that, and then having a call answering the question. This week's subject was vulnerability. What was the question?
Said what?
Wh- What was our question?
The question was is vulnerability a strength or a weakness?
Okay.
And I think I could pretty
So
quickly answer that. It seemed like a pretty straight up
go for
question.
it. Go for it.
It both. It depends on the environment, and it depends on who you're being vulnerable with and how you're being vulnerable with them. So
Okay.
at
Expand on
its
that.
core, I think that vulnerability is like a willingness to be seen without any guarantees. You express something, whether it's a fear, desire, or belief, and you give up control of how it's perceived. Um, and that's it. It's not crying or oversharing. It's just kind of being seen, which is uncomfortable for a lot of people. A lot of people aren't comfortable with themselves or whatever they think, and it can be tricky to let go of perceptions.
That okay. That was a super interesting one. I didn't I didn't come across that. I'll okay. So for me, um, I I agree that it's both. So that's absolutely that's absolutely true for me as well. I would like to backtrack a little bit and do something that I like to do quite a lot before a conversation or a debate, which is to define the terms. So, vulnerability at its root, it comes from some freaking Greek word or something like that. But at its root, it literally means the capacity to be wounded. Yeah, so basically the capacity to be wounded. And in terms of how I see it, it's very close to the definition of risk, which risk is a possibility that an action or a decision will lead to an undesirable outcome. And I think we can see the connection between being wounded and an undesirable outcome. So, inherent to an act of vulnerability is a risk, in my opinion. So, they are both pretty freaking close, if you ask me. Uh, okay, also to go a little further. Um, at the core, I believe vulnerability is also connected to the reaction of other people, and we can use vulnerability to influence how other people perceive perceive us. Mm, there are two distinct paths when it comes to being vulnerable. First one is that you're gonna be perceived as being strong, and the other one is that you're gonna be perceived as being weak. So there is an implicit component in all of that, um, which is connected for me. And here I'll put a dot. Uh, But for me, something that's super important in this whole vulnerability conversation is, unfortunately, your standing in the world, your status, money,
Yeah,
socioeconomic position, and all of this stuff. And the baseline is, and I'll stop at that. The baseline for me is that if you are vulnerable with a lot of outside signs of success, it will be perceived as strength, and otherwise it may be the opposite. How
absolutely.
about that?
I totally agree with that. So vulnerability kind of changes power dynamics. In a strong position, it could signal respect. In a weak position, it could signal, I guess, reduced leverage. An example would be like a CEO admitting a mistake comes from a power or a position of power, makes them look more confident. Whereas like a lower like level employee, for example, admitting some sort of mistake, it could show uncertainty. It could show like instability. So for sure, power dynamics play a role in vulnerability, which is something that I was kind of thinking about. It's like how do you create a psychologically safe environment for people of all levels of status to feel like they could be vulnerable? That's something that I had a class on uh, last year. It was called what is it? Organizational behavior. I don't really recall much from that class, but I do remember that to create a environment of psychological safety, um, things should, or rather, mistakes should be approached with curiosity and acceptance rather than to be like weaponized or suppressed. There was a study. This woman, what's it? Let me go on my I forget exactly who the woman was, but she worked at Harvard at the Harvard Business School, and she found that teams that made more mistakes were actually my bad. I just got a call and I had to decline it. Teams that made more mistakes were actually more productive, and it wasn't because they made more mistakes. It was because they were more willing to, I guess, surface those mistakes. Every team is making mistakes. It's just a matter of um, how they're perceived by the group. Um, so yeah, psychological safety is extremely important for vulnerability.
Okay, yeah. So absolutely, going back to the CEO versus a regular employee or so example, and the fact that in the position of leadership, when it comes from a position of power, it really is the case that an act of true vulnerability may come across as um, powerful as acting from a sincere place. However, in the case of an employee, it may be perceived as like admitting to a mistake, lack of competence, and this sort of stuff. So uh, it really it really is the case that it's inherently connected not only to how you show up and how you show vulnerability, but also to the outside circumstances that are accompanying you uh, while being vulnerable, admitting to something, and all this and all this sort of stuff. When it comes to healthy organizations and this sort of stuff, um, it's a true challenge to create a space in which admitting to your mistakes, being vulnerable, uh, is beneficial to to the wider, is beneficial to the, I don't know, to the goal you want to attain, or to the whole, um, to, to whatever you are doing. And in the car, I think organizations, you mentioned that you've had that at uni. I've also had some subjects connected to that. And judging by that fact, I think organizations uh, will try to um, be more mindful on that front, and really work on creating an organizational culture that will enable that. What do you think about it? Are you, yeah? Are you there? You are
I'm here.
there.
Yeah.
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 What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that creating environments for people to feel safe and vulnerable is extremely important. There's like a few different things to look at in terms of creating that environment. Um, so one of which is to like clarify a standard, kind of say or make it known what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior, what excellence looks like, what a failure looks like. Um, the next is to, I already mentioned this one, but to respond with, like, respond to mistakes and vulnerability with curiosity and not contempt. Another really important one is separating identity from behavior. A lot of people will make a mistake and they, you know, now they're the mistake guy. Like now all they do is fuck up. A lot of it's like internal paradigms, um, and external paradigms. Something that the Buddhists believed was that, if you're able to, I guess, separate yourself from your perceived identity, you'll, I guess, be, what is it? You'll be enlightened. Yeah. So they teach that suffering is derived from the attachment of physical things and to ego, and vulnerability becomes strength when you loosen your attachment how others perceive you, and you accept like impermanence. You like stop defending an identity, and you start like observing, um, like experience, which I think is extremely important. You are not your mistakes, and people should be comfortable with that. And yeah, a few other different philosophies to look at, like Stoicism, for example. Uh, so a lot of people presume that the Stoics didn't encourage emotional uh, outwardness, which isn't necessarily true. So the Stoics didn't encourage emotional suppression. They believe that you can't control external factors, but you can control your or internal response. So yeah, vulnerability in like Stoic terms is accepting that you're not invincible, but refusing to be ruled by your emotions. So strength is the emotional mastery and not emotional like denial, which I think is I think it's cool to get a look, like a holistic view of vulnerability from different perspectives. The existentialists believe that vulnerability is unavoidable, and to exist is basically to face uncertainty and isolation and freedom. Um, and being authentic basically means accepting anxiety rather than hiding from it. So a lot of different views you'll look at is basically just to accept things. Um, you look at like modern psychology with Brene Brown. Um, Her research kind of reframed vulnerability as like the birthplace of like creativity and courage and belonging. Um, some of her key insights were that people who feel like worthy, like at their heart, are more willing to be vulnerable. People who this is actually from her TED talk. We'll link it below. She was talking about how people who are like more willing to admit to mistakes and people who are more willing to say I love you first, that sort of thing, vulnerable things. Um, they have like this like deep rooted belief that they are enough. They're comfortable with themselves. She talked a lot about shame and about how shame blocks vulnerability and about how self acceptance kind of unlocks it. So it kind of ties to everything, you know, the Buddhists, the Stoics, the existentialists. Um, accept things as they are, because you know, at the end of the day, you are separate from. Well, I this will probably contradict Martin Luther King Jr., but you're separate from your actions.
I really like the Buddhist framing on that. I think the idea of no self, which the Buddhist philosophies and the Stoic ones are very connected in many regards, and on that front, I think especially they would also kind of I think that the Stoics would kind of say that the divide what's in your control and what's not in your control, and your actions of being vulnerable is in your control. Others people's reaction, reputation, status, money, everything external that's connected to that is not in your control, and you just have to let go of that. A very nice little summary that you've prepared there on all of the philosophies and their outlook on that. So we've had we've touched upon the organizational behavior, on philosophies, and all that stuff. How about we go back to
Strengths with
more
weakness.
personal more no more personal matters, and how we actually look at it from our own perspective, and maybe it's in our personal lives, because we can be vulnerable in many situations, and some of them we have mentioned. But I think when we think about vulnerability, the kind of mm, the scene that comes to mind is us sitting down with someone close, whether it's a girlfriend, it's a friend, it's a parent, anyone that we feel safe with, and we share uh, some and we share something with them that we wouldn't have otherwise shared with anyone else. And those this personal dimension of vulnerabilities is something important. I think as well. Not going into too much of personal details. What's your outlook on that in your personal life? How do you think about it? How do you approach it? How do you try to judge whether you should actually reveal something or not really? Anything that you may share on that front?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, I think that as long as you know what you're worth, you know that you're a good person, you know that you're trying. I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone struggles with things. Everyone. So to recognize that your vulnerabilities don't define you, I think is really important. Um, to share those things is liberating a lot of times. Um, and I really do think that what Brene Brown was talking about how uh, the people who are able to be most vulnerable are the ones who feel the most secure in themselves. I think that really rings true. Um, I've when I was younger, I would have trouble apologizing for things because I mean I would mess up a lot. Um, and I think that kind of came from a place of ego. Um, I remember one time that I forget exactly what I did, but I messed up and my dad wanted me to apologize for it, and I was having a real hard time apologizing. And I remember I was standing in his room in my underwear, and he's like, "Why do you have such trouble like apologizing?" And I said, "I don't know, ego." And he's like, "I'm your father. Like you should have no ego with me." And I was like, "Dude, I should have no ego with like anyone. We're all people at the end of the day, and everyone messes up." So I don't know. I think to sum it up, um, being vulnerable is important because it shows that we're all human. Um, and it is kind of like a cornerstone of vulnerability. Vulnerability builds connection. It brings people closer together, builds intimacy. Um, and that's increasingly important. Increasingly important considering that everything is so like what's the word? Polarized. It's always us versus them. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. And so that's your summary, and I would like to go at it from a different side, and to
Yeah,
say that uh, there is a true risk to showing the side of yourself that you usually uh, keep as a secret, and you keep to yourself. The consequences of being ridiculed, losing your self-confidence, your sense of self, social status, maybe in the further stages of our lives, also money that will be connected to that, are a real risk. And um, treating that as as a tool, and not really something that we should aim at all of the time. You do have to keep you do have to be mindful about what you share with anyone. At
absolutely.
the end of the day, uh, you yourself are the only person that knows the truth, knows the effort that you put in, knows your actions, knows the motives of your actions, which are also important in this equation. So I think when it comes from a place of being a quote unquote good human, when you know that you've had great intentions, you know what was behind your actions, or your words, um it's uh, then it's really advisable. But I wouldn't treat it lightly. Know that you implied that, but
Yeah,
it's a double-edged sword for sure.
for
and
sure.
it,
Yeah.
and some damage can be made uh, when uh, when used in a wrong way, for sure.
Yeah. This totally circles back to the beginning of the call where both of us were saying that it's a strength and a weakness. So it's a strength when it's undisciplined, when you share everything with everyone. Um, that's not vulnerability. That's just poor boundaries. Um, it's a weakness when you're sharing in environments that aren't, I guess, open to it, environments that punish honesty. Certain corporate cultures, like competitive dynamics, immature relationships. Um, and it's a weakness when you're equating your vulnerabilities with your identity. People let their wounds define them, and that's just not the case. It's a strength, on the other hand, when it's it's vulnerability is shared with a purpose, um, to build connection, to create truth, um, rather than, I guess, to try to elicit sympathy or validation from people. It's a strength when it's chosen. You decide exactly what you want to reveal, um, and you're communicating that deliberately. Um, and lastly, it's a strength when it's kind of like when I guess when you process the emotions first, when you rely on other people to process your emotions for you, that comes across as weakness. And I think it's important to process the emotions that are associated with your vulnerabilities before you ask others to, I guess, weigh in on it.
Okay, and that's where we end today's discussion on vulnerability. Mm, Thank you very much for the input. See you guys in the next one.
Peace out, everyone.
Peace.